Dear Uzoma Asagwara, this letter follows my correspondence to your offices last month, to which I have not yet received a response. In that letter, I indicated that although I've done everything in my power, I still don't know how or when I may potentially access the healthcare I need here in Manitoba. I briefly explained some of my conditions, including EDS and tethered cord, how their symptoms were catalyzed by motor vehicle accidents, as well as my continued struggle for acknowledgement and assistance within our provincial healthcare system. In fact, there are no EDS specialists accessible in Canada outside of Ontario, and no specialists in both EDS and tethered cord. I explained that I found myself in a position where I must provide my own access to what my individual healthcare requires, while offices, agencies, providers, professionals, and organizations who are mandated to assist me either refuse to do so, cause even greater harm, or both. I shared details concerning 18 separate organizations who have and or continue to fail me as a patient, claimant, and a disabled individual. I only have a short window of about a year to a year and a half to recover from surgery. Here are some recent updates since my last letter, of which I feel you need to be aware in your position as Health Minister. The Office of the Manitoba Ombudsman is mandated to ensure a fair administrative process, but have continually failed to act on my behalf in any substantial way. They have demonstrated a clear inability to hold Legal Aid Manitoba accountable for not providing me with a fair appeals process, so I will be unable to work with the same representation as with the Manitoba Health Appeal Board. They have also not initiated my complaint against MPI for combining appeals. Legal Aid Manitoba confirmed in writing that they do represent MPI claimants in exceptional circumstances, but continue to refuse the thorough examination of my complex file required in order to acknowledge its exceptionality. The Claimant Advisor Office initially refused to provide me with an alternative advisor than my previous experiences, which were traumatic. However, the Executive Director of the Manitoba League for Persons with Disabilities reminded them of their duty to accommodate, and that this should not include forcing me to work with those who have demonstrated unwillingness or inability to provide accommodations for me. As such, I will once again be represented by this office in mediation and likely also for an appeal hearing. However, I have been notified that my initial meeting with my new advisor will not be for several more weeks, and then my next opportunity for mediation would be months after that. If this is the case, it's becoming more and more likely that I will be far along in my recovery from surgery before receiving any of the support I need to do so safely and adequately. In the past, I was provided with MPI-sponsored rehab programs, including pool classes and overseeing therapists from a variety of specialties. If I were to only access income replacement or medication benefits, which I'm entitled to, my position and prognosis would dramatically change. And this is more than unjust. Manitoba Health out of province did cover the cost of my surgical procedure in the USA, as directed by the court after our Manitoba Health Appeal Board hearing. However, they did not provide coverage for any additional necessities and refused to reimburse me for any of the medications required for my safe discharge from Rhode Island Hospital. It is dangerous and irresponsible that I should undergo major surgery under general full anesthesia and then be denied particular medications necessary for my body to resume all of its functions afterward. PharmaCare continues to ignore my request for an update regarding my appeal for exception drug status regarding one of my medications, which currently irritates my stomach in capsule and spine, inhibiting my recovery every time I open 6 capsules I take every day. The liquid form of this medication exists, and there's no reason why I should be denied or rather abandoned access while I'm in such a delicate phase of my recovery. My progress continues to be impacted by this patient neglect. The spine clinic at HSC continues to refuse to acknowledge my spinal condition or diagnosis. Although I appreciate the neurosurgeon overseeing me locally writing to Manitoba Health so they would cover my follow-up appointment with my US neurosurgeon, I'm shocked and saddened that this is the only effort that has been made by anyone at this clinic to support my health care. I left another message for the director of this clinic indicating that it is not okay that other patients like me still have nowhere else to go for safe and appropriate health care, neglected by an entire system perpetually. And this director has since outright refused to share any helpful information with any of the doctors on staff, saying that they can't tell them what to do. There are only 2 doctors from which Spinal Cord Injury Manitoba will accept referrals. As I mentioned in my previous correspondence to you, one of them refused to acknowledge any spinal issue in my case whatsoever. The other has apparently finally reviewed my scanned records from the hospital where I had surgery, but for some reason is demanding to see me for an appointment in person in August before being willing to consider referring me to Spinal Cord Injury Manitoba. It has now been a year and a half that I've been unsuccessful in my attempts to be referred to SCIMB, and they no longer return my calls. The first doctor I asked about this was immediately following my tethered cord diagnosis in December of 2023, and although he was a sports medicine physician, claimed he didn't deal with spines and refused to recommend me to anyone or suggest anything that might help me. Inability to access healthcare should not impede access to healthcare. Another direct consequence of this patient neglect is that I've had to cover several virtual out-of-country specialist appointments on my own in order to continue progressing with my health and my recovery. And this is something I do not expect to change anytime soon, as there are no local specialists who are sufficiently familiar with my conditions in order to provide the correct, detailed, complex medical information necessary for coverage of these appointments to be considered by Manitoba Health. And finally, there's the issue of my third human rights complaint, which has been issued against the current provincial government and specifically the Office of the Minister of Justice and MPI. However, the Manitoba Human Rights Commission are not interested in accountability to their own processes. I have not yet received a response from anyone in the office of the Manitoba government and half expect the Commission to attempt to dismiss my complaint without investigation, as they have with the previous two. A shadow report on the Manitoba Human Rights Commission can be found at mhrc.carrd.co. I would gratefully acknowledge any effort toward a response anytime. I've already outlined many ways in which I've been discriminated against and harmed as a result of dismissal, invalidation, medical gaslighting, and neglect. I would also like you to understand all the substantial things I'm recovering from, or some of them, without any of the substantial support that I need. I'm recovering from many traumatic medical appointments when the care I received was neither safe nor adequate. As a result, I'm recovering from a decade of downward spiraling with my health, which led to indescribable losses that include several businesses and one career I spent a lifetime pursuing. I'm recovering from being medically gaslit, being told that all pain is in the brain and there was no tissue damage, although a photo of the part of my spine that was removed demonstrates otherwise. This meant my nervous system, of which the spinal cord is an important part, was pushed beyond its limits and suffered years of traumatic instances, relying on adrenaline and willpower to survive without ever being able to thrive. I'm recovering every millimeter of neurological tissue, my whole spine being damaged for years during a downward spiral while it was stretched well beyond its limits for too long. I'm coming to terms with years of unsafe movement and finally processing and pursuing what safe movement in a healthier nervous system could be like. For too long, my body learned that everything was unsafe, unnecessarily. I'm recovering my ability to walk down my driveway and stand in front of my home without paranoia or panic that MPI surveillance may be watching. On an intellectual level, I know that I'm probably as safe as my neighbor and that we're unlikely to be traumatized or attacked in the moment. However, I know there were so many vulnerable individuals who were surveilled along with me without their or their guardian's knowledge or consent. So in a very real sense, none of us are safe. I am also recovering from doctors lying about me. I'm recovering from a difficult process of becoming my own specialist, as well as the full physical, mental, emotional, and financial impacts of leaving this country, being stranded in one state before traveling to another for the surgical procedure I needed to save my life, and staying for a week before taking 3 flights home. It would have been an extraordinary undertaking if I were surrounded by all the support I needed. However, my spouse and I have navigated every aspect of this process without assistance. More than anything, I'm recovering from years without any support, during which time the entirety of my extraordinarily complex healthcare needs has all fallen on me. In my previous correspondence, I indicated that this government has failed to support me, protect me, and to ensure that I receive fair processes again and again, indirectly harming my spouse as a result. I know there are other patients like me who could live entire lifetimes undiagnosed if things remain as they are. So I continue to ask the spine clinic director, and I'm also continuing to ask you, when will we be able to access the safe and appropriate medical care, the support from specialists, the benefits and other medications that we need? Is it really on us to educate the whole province? I also previously stated that MPI will continue to win by discriminating against people like me until they are commanded by a court process to change their behavior, or until this provincial NDP government steps in to make change. Otherwise, there is no chance. I'm enclosing the citations from my Manitoba Health Appeal Board witness testimony, of which I encourage the spine clinic to become aware. Again, they said they wouldn't pass it along. Once again, I ask that you please consider my life, my rights, and my health valuable enough to take some action, and soon. You may be the only one with the necessary authority to create change in one or more of these situations. Although I've been alone in my recovery from spinal surgery for 12, now 13 weeks, This reality does not need to continue. With even a few offices, agencies, or organizations providing timely assistance, the future for patients like me may be very different from my past experiences. The future may be even different for me, and this remains my greatest hope. Thank you for your attention and for anything you're able to do, which may improve the situation for all patients. Respectfully, Lindsay White.